Administrator Schmidt, I believe that concludes the presentations of the departments and officials for the budget.
It does.
committee.
That is the end of the presentations. There are two agenda items left before you begin deliberations, and that is we're adding a discussion on the budget forecast and the compensation board discussion. I
Right.
propose you do the budget forecast first and then the compensation board, but whatever you decide, Chair.
I believe
the order.
that's, what we had determined earlier today, so let's stick with that.
We have
Yeah,
handouts
we'd
to
let folks
distribute
know
based
that.
on the request before lunch. Our staff has provided the graph, so if we could please distribute that. And then yesterday, you received the budget forecast one-pager that looks like this. If you could please bring that out, and if you don't have it, let us know, and we'll get that for you. Thank you. We'll make sure both of these are online. The forecast should already be, and if not, we'll get them both online.
Okay.
And after they're distributed, maybe Sandra or Elizabeth, would you like to explain the graph, please?
Okay, so good afternoon, and I think I'm going to start with the forecast, Gary, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And we can take it from a very high level. Really, I'm going to focus on the bold rows in this forecast, and hopefully it's not too small and you're able to read it. But the beginning fund balance, and that's just the carry forward. Think of it as the amount that's available year over year, the net revenue that's available year after year. And we use it to carry us forward at the beginning of the fiscal year. I may have mentioned before to you that property tax is the majority of our revenue in the general fund. We get the bulk of our property tax at the end of November and beginning of December. So in that time period, we get roughly 90% of the property tax that we are going to receive for the entire year. So we use that a high beginning fund balance number because we will be dipping into it cash flow wise for months before we get the November and December distribution. So when you look at budgets, government budgets, that beginning fund balance number is critical to carry us through those first couple of months. The next line that we'll point to is property taxes. And you'll see, if you look at, it says forecast year one, that forecast year one ties, or very closely ties, to the budget that you're seeing before you today for fiscal year 22-23. When we shared this forecast in April, that year one is what is fiscal year 22-23. And then the out years just align sequentially. So fiscal year, the second year forecast is 23-24, and the further out we go, the more tentative those numbers are, because we are applying assumptions based on the trend. So Mr. Cernak earlier this afternoon or earlier this morning said, can you do a linear regression? He and I had a conversation. It's like, oh, it's just trending. Yes, we trend the forecast based on our history and based on economic data that is coming out, based on information that is coming from the state, unemployment data. We gather all sorts of data, and then we start to drop it into this forecast to create a picture of the out years. And originally, we were only going out 5 years, and then when we started talking about the courthouse project and that it may be a 30-year project, we realized that we needed something in the longer-term range to show what the financial picture would be like. So now we have a forecast that goes through fiscal year 49-50. So but now back to property taxes. In forecast year one, that 150.9 million ties to the general fund property tax number that you are seeing in the budget document before you. That is different. Commissioner Savas, you were looking at an all-county property tax number. I believe that number is 178 million. that property tax number includes roughly, and I'm going by memory now, but it includes roughly 20 or 22 million from the sheriff's levy, and it includes roughly 5.5 million from the GO debt. All of those revenues are property tax revenues, and so when we roll it up together at the aggregate, you get to that 178 million number. But when we're looking at just the general fund, that number is about 150.9 million in fiscal year 22-23. So wanted to give you comfort that yes, those two numbers do tie, and we update them several times a year when we're giving you presentations to make sure that we're trending correctly, but also because if you'll remember from like 2 years ago, we actually reduced that general fund forecast property tax number because we had concerns about COVID and what COVID would do to our collection rate. And now 2 years later, we're seeing those fears have not materialized. So now we are adjusting that property tax number up. And in fact, I'm going to look at the assumption here. Property tax assessed value growth, we have plugged in 3.8% beginning in fiscal year 3. I believe next year, and Blaze, I'm going to blow it because I can't remember the number. I think now our projected for 2021, I believe, is 4.1% based on what we're seeing. Next year, maybe 4%. And again, if we take that in and correlate it to what we heard Bronson Rada say, I believe his numbers are like 3.7%. And again, our numbers are 3% growth plus construction reduced by the discount and delinquency rate. So fairly comparable, but you will see a little bit of differences just because the numbers are so large. So, okay, I'm going to keep going. The rest, charges and fees, revenue from bonds, all other revenue, we get to an operating revenue number, and that's the next bold line that you see. And we also have included a percentage change year over year. And in the forecast year, we have roughly 4% of a revenue change from the 21-22 projected to the forecast year 22-23. So I'm going to bring us on down, and I'm not going to speak to each line of the operating expense, but I will speak to the major categories. Personnel, we did include a 4.5% COLA in fiscal year 22-23. That was the maximum allowed per union contracts, and so that's what we have plugged in. And we also included a 1%, I'll call it merit increase, but HR would correct me and say it's not a merit-based system, but not all employees get that because some employees are capped out, others are at the beginning of their careers, and so they still have the opportunity to have a step increase. The combination of those we've estimated at roughly 1%. So in personnel, across the board, you'll see roughly 5.5% for salaries and wages. That's separate from PERS increases, which PERS increase is on a biannual basis. So it increases 1 year and then remains the same in year 2. We've plugged in those amounts, and we've gotten those forecasts from Oregon PERS. So they have data that is specific to Clackamas County. We've gone to their website to get their projected increases for Clackamas County and our specific employee base. We've also got benefits that have been trended, and so we've included those costs in personnel. And then we add in a 5% vacancy rate. So again, this is a forecast, it's an estimate, but we know that at any given point, there will be vacancies across the county. That can vary from year to year. Some years it's been lower than 5%. Some years it's been closer to 7%. And that's actually where we have been in the last few years. It's been up as high as 7%. But for our forecast, because we do try and stay somewhat conservative, we have a 5% vacancy rate baked in to the forecast. So then we come down to operating expenses, and again, so that's a trend basis. And then we get to what we call a net operating budget. When we refer to a sustainable budget, that is the line we are referring to. It is the net operating budget, and it's inclusive of materials and services, personnel, capital outlay, general fund support transfers, debt service, and transfer to building maintenance. It's basically everything that we would be required to maintain if the world blew up and we had no more revenue coming in, but still had to pay everything out. So we've included that, and again, that's the trend. So when we're referring to a sustainable budget, we're looking at operating revenues less operating expenses. Is that number positive? And for the forecast year, especially if we're talking about the 5-year period, that is a positive number, and certainly it's a positive number for fiscal year 22-23. So I'm going to stop there and allow you to ask questions, and then we can keep going.
Yeah, so,
Yes, Commissioner Salas.
so thank you, Sandra, for doing this, and I expected I got my notes that I read off of when we were talking earlier, and I kind of expected the property taxes to be the stable line and the continued line all the way into 24, 25. But I expected the remaining green and red here, for sake of argument, to be dash lines, because it'd be speculative, right? And I say that because Administrator Schmidt's budget message was that you cut $15 million over the next 3 years, $5 million each year, and that would be a budgeted expense rather than a real operating expense. And the word I used earlier, the 3 things, was property tax, which you covered, operating expenses, which you've covered, which is actually, the way it's reflected here is actually is more of a budgeted expense, so to speak, but it's not reflective that, or matches what the administrator spoke to her yesterday. So I think everything's good here, but I would probably ask that maybe when we go forward from present budget year forward, that they're dashed and they reflect what is there. What I'm trying to get at, and you all have this, right, is that down below there, what's in parentheses in red, that $16 million number, the $9 million year after year after year, how we get a trajectory, a runway to address that, because we have to fold that in. It is the courthouse and the libraries are in the budget. They're not completely funded in the budget, but they're in the budget. And we saw that today. So I appreciate the work there. My only other comment is on the operating expense, the green line, okay? From all the business people I've talked to, that trend is much higher. In the real world operating expense numbers right now, materials and services is 15 to 25% higher across business sectors right now. So I just wonder if that's a realistic number.
Did you want me to answer that? I think two things. One is that when we put together the budgets, I would say for the most part, and this is probably a little too rosy, but it's what we would need if we were fully staffed. And the reality is that doesn't happen. So I'm looking at finance. I think we have 46 people budgeted. And I shared with you yesterday, in my entire career, I have been fully staffed 5 days out of my entire career. We celebrated the 1 week that we were fully staffed. And then the very next Monday, somebody resigned. It's like, okay, thanks for that. But it just doesn't happen. And so in an ideal world, you would expend all of those monies, and every project that you had built into your budget would get completed, and it would be completed on time. But the reality is that we have attrition, we have retirements, we have deaths. And so we don't get everything completed. Sometimes, unbeknownst to us, we have supply chain issues and things stack up. And so we can't get the work done at the pace that we wanted. And when we have vacancies, I'll give you this as an example. We have trainings that we have budgeted, but if there's vacancies and you're covering for somebody that should have that position filled, you're not going to be able to go to that training because you're covering a vacant position. And so you have savings from that. You have savings for the position because it's vacant, but then you also have savings from the training because you weren't able to go. So those sorts of things stack up, and it results in a savings at year end. On the good note is it helps us in our fund balance number, which is a good thing, but it hurts in the work that is able to get done because, again, we would have been able to complete it at a faster pace. So do I think that that number is a little too conservative? In some cases, it is, but I think Administrator Schmidt, we had a number that he gave us, and I actually appreciate from a budget perspective that we said, this is what we can afford, and then he said to the departments, make this work. So for those of us that are general fund supported, his instructions were, you're getting a 2% increase, make it work. And what some departments had to do was reduce in order to make that work. In some cases, they had the cushion to be able to make it work. In other cases, you may see them back asking for additional general fund support. But I think as we try and right size is probably not the word, but as we try and change the size of the organization in order to make these special projects fit, I think that you're going to see more of that. But again, thankfully, that'll be your decision and not mine. You'll be able to make that decision, and then we will carry it out. So I'll pause there and let you guide us.
Yeah, well, I think you did a good job, and I think it'd be nice really to build on this and then flow in those capital projects and the funding requirements and just layer this on so it's comprehensive, but it's a good start.
Thank you. Chair, Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you. On your property tax line, which is blue, that's an assumption of the 3% limitation that every year based on Measure 50, correct?
It is a combination. It's actually 3.8%, and it's based on.
Now, it's 3%, but it's the 0.8% growth.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And
so
it's
the more,
and discounted. So it's got a discount and delinquency because that is allowed right now.
a discount if you pay your property taxes at the same time you.
Yes.
Got it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for that. Some of these capital outlay projects that Commissioner Savas has referred to, we have not made decisions on yet. We're still waiting for final figures. I mean, of course, it's safe to assume that the costs have gone up. We all know that, and that's why we're going very slow on these, and we've paused a couple of them, mainly the two libraries, to try to see if indeed prices will go down or not, and try to acquire maybe some new revenues for those projects. So I don't know how we're going to layer the costs of construction projects over the top of this until we come up with solid policy decisions to move forward on this. I'm all for doing that. But this board has a lot of heavy lifting in the next fiscal year on making decisions on what we're going to build, not build, and where that money is coming from. I just want to make that real apparent to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Shaw?
Yes, thank you for this chart. It more than answered my questions I had in my head when I was driving in this morning. On the chart, the difference between operating expenses and revenues from this next fiscal year through 26-27 is about $4 to $5 million, right? And it's based on Sandra, it's based on this spreadsheet, right?
Correct.
So,
and,
yeah.
and there are minor changes, I should say, to the spreadsheet, but
Okay.
that will always be the case.
Yeah,
So,
but that's close enough. That's close enough. So with this, which is really kind of a worst-case scenario with the capital improvement projects, right, that we haven't, like Commissioner Smith says, we haven't committed to some of them yet. That's going to be how we can hopefully increase the margin between operating expenses and operating revenues in these coming years? Because this right here is kind of tight. The red line and the green line, they're so close together. Yeah, that's, like Paul said, that's a bit, you didn't use the word scary, but that's a bit tight with not much fudge factor for cost of living and things.
Inflation.
Yeah. So, Sandra, thanks a lot. I'm glad I don't have your job. But I have one more question for you. Please help me understand on the revenue less expenses line on here, okay? Revenue, by halfway down, revenue less expenses. You go over to FY 22-23, forecast year one, and you got a $16.9 million deficit. Tell me about that. And that goes all the way to 27-28.
Okay,
Could
so
you
we-
explain that to me?
Yes, so if we take the net operating income or loss in brackets, do you see that on the page? In the middle? That's that sustainable budget line, and then below it are the special projects. So if we moved forward on the special projects and we spent at the rate that of the values that we were given, then we would have a deficit of negative 16 million. That's not necessarily a bad thing because we do have the fund balance or the unappropriated ending fund balance. This forecast was predicated on us using that down over time to the policy level by fiscal year 4950.
Yes, but you have, for your net balance reserve requirements, it's all in the black all the way to 4950, right? Maybe, I tell you what, Sandra, when we're done here, let's spend about 5 minutes together, okay? I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cernach, and then Commissioner
I answered my
Smith.
question.
Oh, okay, Commissioner Smith?
So, Sandra, in this budget projection you just presented to us, there are assumptions built into it.
Correct.
And those assumptions have not been codified in policy yet from this Board of County Commissioners, correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
So that causes me to have a curiosity question just for the sake of what we're ultimately going to do and then what the Board of County Commissioners will do at some point in the future, I take it. And that would be, I'm assuming it's not the Budget Committee's job to determine if the courthouse and other projects, libraries or whatever they happen to be, move forward. That is a policy decision that will be made by the Board of County Commissioners at the point in time that you make those decisions. But as we're addressing this budget, how do we reconcile if any of those funds are already built into the budget? Or are they not? Are they out of there as far as capital expenses? That looks like they're in there, but I just want to make sure, and I want to make sure that the general public is understanding where we are with that also.
I can answer that.
And you can answer that for
I'll
me?
give you my perspective. So
If I said that all correctly.
No, it's very, very good. Your only job today, Budget Committee members, is before you leave, whether it's whenever you leave tomorrow or Friday or Saturday, is to approve a budget. That's your only role for fiscal year 2022-23. And then that's the guidance that staff uses to spend money, the public's money, as you direct us. We can do supplemental budgets all year long.
Yeah.
So if and when the board approves the courthouse, we can make adjustments to this budget during the fiscal year. So you don't have to look ahead much further than what's presented to you for the upcoming fiscal year, knowing it's a fluid document. We'll change it through supplemental budget processes during mid-year as
Yeah,
necessary.
well, and I just wanted to make it clear, too, that our role is not to determine whether there will or will not be something constructed.
Correct.
There may be input on that, or just, or assumptions, I'm not sure. I don't ever like that word, but, but that's not our job.
Okay.
Budget Committee's job.
Correct.
Because we don't have the background to be able to determine something like that. So I appreciate it. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated by that a little bit because it was quite enlightening yesterday to go back and listen to the budget message and the discussion and Mr. Feely's articulate comments, which everyone seemed to agree with, which is contrary to what we're saying today. Actually contrary,
Yeah.
because I think the guidance was that we do need to prepare, and, you know, we need to be mindful. And out of that and the days following, we also talked about getting ourselves structured for that. So I've been doing public budgets for 25 years now, consistently, plus my business budget, and helping others do the same thing with projects in the upcoming projects and planning for them. So what one would do, what a business person would do, even a public sector person would do, is say, okay, I've got these projects coming up. If I did them and I graphed it, what would I need to do to pay for that? And you could pretty well see that if you're going to cut your budget to make other things happen, or you're going to compromise or let go of something to pay for something, you could figure out the trajectory you needed to go. There's different ways of doing it, but the graph is one visual way of seeing what you have to do. And so that's what we discussed last year to some degree. And I think great audio. If you want to go back and listen to them, I'm happy to send you a link. But I think it is our duty, frankly, to do that, especially when we see on this forecast what's in parentheses in red. Now, we can be, again, if Mr. Schmidt's plan was overlaid on this with the $5 million steps, okay, that instead of being a steady line, you see a $5 million drop and a $5 million drop and a $5 million drop in the coming years. That might get us there. But I would argue also, as a business person, going into an inflationary period in a recession, I'd be extremely nervous when those two lines are so close together. Yeah. Extremely nervous. And again, I argue that green line, that expense line or materials and services is going to be far high. It already is far higher than that. So I argue that we're going to be talking about this next year and realize that the materials and expenses are much higher than the operating revenue budgeted.
Thank you. So just as a comment back on that, I wasn't necessarily suggesting that we ignore the fact of the courthouse or the libraries or any other capital projects, but just wanted to be sure that the actual making a decision about whether there will or will not be, or how you'd move forward on that, is not something that, not something that would happen right now during this process. But I think we are preparing for those in this draft budget, and we're preparing as we continue to move along. And I agree that those lines are close, but I got to tell you that I feel better the fact that the red line for revenue is on top and the green line for expenses is on the bottom. So that to me is a good sign, a good thing. So, Commissioner Schell, I think you had your card up. Did you? Or no? You just had forgotten it again, huh?
I've given up.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, sir. So where does that put us? Yes, or do you want to try to wrap this up and then take a break, or would you rather?
Oh, I thought this was done.
Well, that's what I was thinking, and that's what I just want to check on. We have the information that had been requested. And Paul, your card's still up. Did you wish to speak again? I'm sorry, I did not realize that.
I shift slightly, still on the same topic, but slightly another way to make a point here, if you're ready.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the other way of looking at this is, let's say, because Gary stated it, the administrator stated it, let's say that, because, again, listening to the tape from a year ago, the May 5th decision to move forward with the courthouse was mentioned, not by myself, but by staff and Mr. Feely, I believe. And that was that, okay, you made the decision to move forward, so what are you going to do to get the glide path? That words were used, to get the glide path to get there. So if you prolong the glide path and you prolong the step downs and expenditures, the reductions, okay, let's just say that the glide path is $2 million a year, or it's $5 million a year, but you don't do it till late. Let's just say that you planned on a $2 million a year reduction in last year, and then this year, and then next year, and you didn't make those reductions, that's 2 million and 2 million and 2 million for a total of 6 that's lost. It's just
True.
spent. It's spent.
But our budget has been cut every year, so those cuts have been made.
What I'm saying is the trajectory. That's why it's smarter to get ahead of it, to save those monies as opposed to expending them, knowing you're going to cut them anyhow. They're lost. They're lost forever. You don't get them back. That's my point. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate. Mr. Cernak, excuse me, not Cernak. Commissioner Shaw.
No, I'm, Chair.
You're good? Okay,
I'm
all
sorry,
right.
I don't have any
We're
questions
good.
right now.
Okay, can we move on then to compensation? But